Possession. Possession is the transfer of a person's living spirit, dead spirit, animal spirit, or divine spirit. When a person dies, the body perishes and only the soul remains, and in most cases, the soul is called to the heavenly realm. However, the souls of those who have died with intense feelings toward this world rarely remain in this world, and particularly evil ones may possess those who have similar feelings. Such a story about possession. On the TV screen, commentators were talking about a recent bizarre murder case. Suzuki, a female comedian, began to speak. "I'm so scared. This is. They cut off both hands and feet of a human being and left him or her alive, didn't they? It's not a human thing to do. What kind of person was the murderer? It's not a human thing to do. What kind of person was the murderer?" The reluctant veteran actor Yamada, the MC, opened his mouth in response to Suzuki's question. The body was found 3 months ago in a room of an abandoned house in a quiet residential area in Kanagawa Prefecture. The body was a male, his limbs had been severed with a sharp blade, and it appeared that the body had already been decomposed considerably. The police began investigating the case as a murder. The previous month, they identified the murderer. The murderer was a 45-year-old woman who lived alone in an old apartment about 1 kilometer from the vacant house at the scene. She had been having an affair with her 51-year-old male boss at the same company for several years, but he broke up with her last summer. However, the woman continued to have one-sided feelings for him and stalked him. Finally, around the beginning of this year, she stunned him unconscious on his way home and took him to an abandoned house, where she committed this murder. She then put the severed limb in a large plastic bag and took it home. At this point, Yamada sighs. The studio fell silent. The silence was broken by Suzuki, also a pin-up comedian. "What happened to the murderer?" MC Yamada, a little hushed, continued, "It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, but when the murderer returned home, he boiled the victim's limbs in a small bowl in his house and ate them until morning, after which he took his own life." The studio was abuzz. The screen then switched to a photo of the killer woman's face. The studio was even more agitated. She had long black hair and a long face with a fair complexion. Her eyes are narrow and hung up like a fox's. She has a long black hair and a long face. She was smiling, but his eyes were not smiling, and his left and right black eyes were each looking in a different direction. Hey, isn't this crime scene in the neighborhood? And the murderer was a woman, and she was eating the body's limbs. It's a scary world we live in now, isn't it? Ryosuke, sitting at the dining table, muttered to himself as he watched TV. Then his oldest son, Yoshihiro, a junior high school student sitting next to him, opened his mouth as he gazed intently at a piece of tempura between his chopsticks. "What's this?" Ryota, an elementary school student sitting in front of him, also said, "Yes." "Which one?" and stood up to take a peek. That day's meal was tempura, but Yoshihiro did not seem to know what kind of tempura he had just eaten half a mouthful of. His wife Manami, in the kitchen beyond the table, is watching him with a silver ball container in her hand and a smile that seems to be stuck to her white face. Lately, Ryosuke had been feeling somewhat uncomfortable with his wife's smile. It is a smile that is somewhat impersonal and artificial, like a no mask. Her eyes were not smiling, only the corners of her mouth were turned up. Then suddenly Manami opened her mouth. "By the way, this coming weekend is our wedding anniversary." Ryosuke looked a little impatient and replied, "Sorry, I'm traveling on business on Saturday and Sunday." After a short pause, Ryosuke replied, "By the way, this weekend is our wedding anniversary." "By the way, this weekend is our wedding anniversary." Ryosuke smiled and repeated the same words to his wife, to which she replied again, "Sorry, that's why I'll be out of town on Saturday and Sunday." Ryosuke felt a slight chill and fell silent as she repeated the same question with a smile like a broken doll. After a while, Ryota, having finished his meal, mutters, "It's time for observation," and leaves the dining table. Ryota is currently on summer vacation, and his free assignment is the ridiculous theme of the ecology of cockroaches. His homeroom teacher asked him to observe a familiar creature, and he chose the cockroach. With Ryosuke's help, she managed to capture dozens of cockroaches and put them in a breeding case. When Ryosuke asked his son why he had chosen such a theme, the son replied, "Because everyone hates cockroaches." He wondered what kind of ecology a creature that is disliked by everyone but still lives on strong. He said it was a simple motive. Ryota opened the sash door at the back of the living room and went out onto the balcony. The breeding case containing the cockroaches is there. As if to shake off the awkwardness between him and Manami, Ryosuke mutters, "Well, I guess Daddy will observe too," and stands up. Then, "Papa Tilda," came Ryota's voice calling. "What is it?" Ryosuke ran to the balcony. Ryota was standing half-consciously in front of the rearing case at the edge of the balcony. "What's wrong?" Ryosuke called from behind him. In front of his son was a large holding case in which dozens of cockroaches were moving about busily. Ryota, wearing a thin glove, held out the palm of his right hand in front of Ryosuke's eyes. There were several strange creatures. At first glance, they appeared to be cockroaches, but they had no legs and were wiggling their brown bodies like caterpillars. "Oh, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this?" Ryosuke asked his son, but the son just looked down and shook his head from side to side. Yoshiharu called his son over and asked him, but his son replied, "I don't know." The fact that the cockroach had 6 legs, whereas yesterday it had 6 legs as usual, could only be the result of someone's malicious mischief, but it was not a case of someone going out of their way to break into someone's house. But who would go to the trouble of breaking into someone's house and tearing off the legs of a cockroach in its rearing case? If there is, he or she must be a very sick person. The thought of someone trespassing into a stranger's yard late at night, sticking his hand into a cockroach case on the balcony, and tearing off the legs of the cockroaches one by one gave him the creeps. Eventually the breeding case was moved to Ryota's room. The next morning, as Ryosuke was putting on his shoes at the entrance, Manami stood behind him with the usual smile and opened her mouth. "Come home early," she said, "I'll be right back. It's your favorite tempura again today." Ryosuke was about to reply that he understood when Manami reminded him that he had promised to stop by the woman's apartment today. "I'm sorry," he said, "I have to work today and will be home late." Then he repeated the same words again, like a broken doll. At that moment, Ryosuke was horrified. He noticed a vague black figure in front of the back door, which he could see over her shoulder. But by the time he looked twice, it was gone, and he turned on his heel and left the house without a word, feeling creeped out. Then, on his way down the alley to the subway, he realized he had left his cell phone at home. Quickly turning on his heel, he ran and then returned home. I ring the doorbell at the front door, but my wife does not answer. My son seemed to have gone to school. I put pressure on the doorknob, thinking, is he going to the bathroom? I put pressure on the doorknob and it turned easily. I went up the hallway and took a few steps to the living room, where I found the door to a room on the side of the hallway half open and heard a faint, happy humming coming from there. It was Ryota's room. Peering through the crack, I saw Manami standing in front of a study desk in one corner of the room with her back to me. On the desk is a breeding case filled with cockroaches. What the hell is she doing? With a hint of unease, he steps into the room and stares at her. He looks over his shoulder and sees his wife humming happily in profile. He slowly shifts his gaze to her hand. Then, feeling a slight chill down his spine, he unintentionally let out a small voice. Why? He let out a small voice. Manami, wearing a thin glove, picked up a cockroach with her left hand and tore off its legs one by one with her right hand. When she finishes tearing off one cockroach, she puts it on the edge of the desk, sticks her arm in again to take one out, and starts tearing them off one by one in the same way. Several cockroaches, which had been made to look like caterpillars, were lined up on the edge of the desk, wriggling about. Manami stopped her hand and looked at them for a while. Then he nodded once in satisfaction and began humming again. The long, black legs fell one after another into the silver bowl placed below. Next to the container was a knife. Ryosuke felt a surge of nausea, and he ran to the bathroom to use the toilet. He knelt down in front of the toilet seat for a while, but when he finally stood up and turned around, his whole body was covered in hair. My whole body was furious. Before I knew it, Manami was standing in the hallway. She was holding a sashimi knife in her right hand, smiling that smile and muttering. It was too soon. The woman's eyes were narrowed and hung up, the left and right black eyes looking in different directions, and white foam was dripping from her mouth. The face of the murdered woman he had seen on TV last night flashed in his mind, and both his knees began to tremble. I've got to get out of here. Despite the cries of his heart, Ryosuke's body did not move, as if something was holding him down. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.